And then you rejoin. Hi, Ibrahim.
Hello.
And hello, Kristen.
Hello.
All right, so we'll do a round of introductions, and the question is, when you're here, who do you represent and who do you not represent? And I will start with Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Boss. I've been in Eugene for about 4 years. And before that, I have lived in a large number of cities that mostly for historic reasons have great walkable middle housing neighborhoods. So I've spent most of my life as a renter in townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, you name a configuration that is not a single family home. And that's where I've lived. I now live in a townhouse cluster at the corner of Friendly and 28th. And I'm on the Housing Policy Board and the Renters Protections Committee of that board. I don't speak for the Housing Policy Board. I think to some extent, I would speak from a renter perspective in that affordability and expanding of housing stock would be big priorities for me. So there we go.
Thank you. And I will pass it over to Dan Lombardi.
Thank you. I'm Dan Lombardi. I'm here with the Historic Review Board. I'm a commissioner on that, a member of that board. I speak as a member of that board and generally as a representative of what we represent as a board. I don't speak for other board members. I don't know their views on middle housing. We have not had a discussion about this. So, this would be something I'd bring back to them and then bring their thoughts back or have them get involved in the process. I also, don't speak for the Planning Commission, which we are under. So as part of that, but I do speak as a single family home owner and as someone who has rented before and has lived in cities that have watched middle housing processes not go well. And so as a recent transplant to Eugene in the last couple of years, I'm really interested in this process and want to see how it evolves. And so I think I sort of wear those dual hats of like, what does it look like from a historic preservation standpoint and how do we maintain character? But also, as a resident of the city, what does the city look like moving forward?
Thank you. And I'll pass it over to other Dan.
Hello, I'm Dan Isaacson, member of the Planning Commission. I also don't speak for the Planning Commission. I'm just here to kind of report back and listen in. I graduated from the University of Oregon in the early 2000s and spent 12 years in Chicago, which if anybody's been there, is a very highly dense series of neighborhoods. It's called the City of Neighborhoods. So you have this kind of warring factions between keeping the soul of the past in its historical nature, as well as planning for its future with old infrastructure, old pipes, old everything else, while we're trying not to have everything from gentrification to the flood of suburbia in and out. So that's where I got my master's degree, and it's been a lot of time trying to balance all of those levers at the same time. So coming back to Eugene after 12 years, it's been rather interesting to see what's changed, both good and bad, as density has kind of gone up here in Eugene. So I think this is a good conversation to have now as we kind of expand.
Thank you. And I'll pass it over to Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Slavor. I am currently here representing Sustainability Commission. However, normally I work at Cameron McCarthy Landscape Architecture and Planning. I'm a planner. I've been doing land use work in and around Eugene for the last few years. I graduated from the U of O in 2016 from the master's program. Additionally, outside of work, outside of Sustainability Commission, I'm chair of the DNA, the Downtown Neighborhood Association. So I'm not representing the DNA in this capacity, but I was just thinking a little bit about, I took some notes on who I feel like I represent. Obviously, white, middle income. I am a renter. I rent a duplex. I've been living in a duplex for the last 4 years. I do feel also I'm representing certainly not all, but a definite contingent of young people, and just our feelings about housing and the value of affordable housing in this moment. And again, kind of my identity as a planner and doing work in sustainability. In terms of things I don't represent, I would not say I represent non-renters or homeowners, just that's a place I don't have experience, and as well as BIPOC or low-income communities. I wouldn't say I can represent that either. And then I'm not representing the DNA in this either, but coming from Sustainability Commission. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelsey. And I'll pass it over to Ibrahim.
Hello, my name is Ibrahim Kulibali, and I represent the Human Rights Commission. I'm a Human Rights Commissioner for the city of Eugene. I'm also the president of NAACP. So here I'm not representing NAACP. I'm a homeowner, and I also have rental. And I'm not representing the homeowners association, you know, with the lens of rental owners. But yeah, I'm here as a liaison or as a representative for the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. And finally, I will pass it over to Kristen.
Sorry, I'm on a device without a camera, so you don't get to see my face, but I will in the future be present so you can see my face. So I am like Dan, I'm a liaison from the Planning Commission. So the role that we have is I'm not representing the Planning Commission in terms of the individual members. We will pass information back and report back to the Planning Commission. I am a neighbor of the Fairmount Neighborhood Association. I am a prior board member and NLC member. I am not representing the Fairmount Neighborhood Association. I have a degree in architecture and a master's degree in planning. So I have that kind of educational and professional reference. I currently work for an architecture and planning firm. And I've worked at this firm for 21 years, and I've been in Eugene since 1995. So prior to that, I'm a homeowner now. Prior to living in Eugene, I was a renter in dense populations like San Francisco and Berkeley. I've lived in low-income neighborhoods. Currently, I live right next to the university neighborhood, so I've been very involved and have a lot of friends that are university students, renters. I'm not representing them, though I do feel like I have a breadth of experience. I've also worked and lived abroad. I was in the Peace Corps and lived in a lot of other parts of the world that have had a lot of other kind of living situations. So I can bring a broader context sometimes in how I reference things. So hopefully I captured that.
Thank you. This is a great group. It's exciting to hear the variety of perspectives that are coming to this conversation. So now I'm going to hand it over to Terry to give a little bit of background on House Bill 2001 and what we are working with. Terry, did you want me to share my screen or did you want to share your screen? You're muted.
It would be great if you would share your screen, Sophie.
I would be delighted. One moment.
Thank you. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not muted. Okay, I'm not muted. So as it says on the slide, House Bill 2001 is an Oregon bill that was passed in June of last year. And its stated intent is to provide more opportunities for a variety of housing types in traditionally single-family neighborhoods and to increase the overall housing supply in and around cities. Right from the text of the bill, the following statement is included. No later than June 30th, 2022, Eugene, or it says large cities, must amend the city's land use regulations to allow, and there's kind of two main parts here, a duplex on each lot or parcel that's within the city limits, zoned for residential use, and where the city's current regulations allow a detached single-family dwelling. And the second part is that the other middle housing types, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses, must be allowed in residential zones within the city that allow detached single-family dwellings. And at the bottom here is an important note. The Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, is drafting and adopting a model code and minimum development standards through their rulemaking process. That is still underway, and the meetings are available on the web. They are coming out with a new packet of draft rules tomorrow, and we've been tracking this rulemaking very closely as it will outline the requirements for the city to meet at a minimum. So that packet that comes out tomorrow will outline the latest set of recommended rules, and they will go before the Land Conservation and Development Commission, the deciding body, in November, mid-November. More information about that can be found on our website as well as the state website. Go ahead, Sophie. So a little bit about what we know so far in terms of what's required by the bill and is very prescriptive or predetermined, and then where there are where there's some room for cities to develop their own take on the legislation. So in the predetermined category, we have the types. Those are listed out and defined by the bill. The zones, as the previous slide mentioned, the zones that allow single-family detached are included in this bill. The number of dwellings in an area, sometimes referred to as density. So that is spelled out prescriptively in the draft rules. Also, the design standards for duplexes. There is a requirement that the standards for duplexes not be any more onerous than the standards for single-family homes. And then there are some additional limitations about what the cities can and cannot adopt through their own codes. As far as what's undetermined, we have siting standards, and these have to do with how a home or group of homes sit on a lot. So their setbacks from property lines, their maximum height, their maximum lot coverage or amount of a lot that they're allowed to cover with buildings and paving, and on-site parking requirements. In addition, design standards there's some flexibility in design standards, including building orientation and architectural design requirements, provided that they don't prevent or unreasonably delay the building of middle housing types. I would summarize by saying that the overall intent is to allow more housing types in more places, and we've been using that messaging in trying to get out the general intent of the bill. So as I just mentioned, the model code and minimum standards are still under development. And while we have to adopt our own code that comply with those, we have a deadline and a grant funded deadline that we are working with. And so we have begun our process and focusing this first phase on hearing from the community through a variety of different boards, commissions, and panels, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and then establishing guiding values and principles for the technical phase of the project. And the 7 pillars here are listed on the side of the slide. These were developed for Envision Eugene. So back in 2011, when the city was going through the process of determining our need to grow or not our urban growth boundary, we established a community vision through a process that has some things in common with what we're doing with you all tonight. We did a lot of listening and hearing from the community in various groups, and then used what we got from those conversations, people's concerns and hopes, to draft guiding values and principles for the project. And those became these 7 pillars here. And we present them as an example, although there are certainly things that we have learned since 2011 that are missing from this vision for the future of Eugene. So that's a reference point for you and an example as we move through this. Oh, one more thing about that. I want to make the point that your input is not static. All input from this group and other groups we're meeting with will be gathered by staff and then used to summarized and shared with the Planning Commission and City Council as we reach the end of the fall. I think that's it.
Thank you, Terry. I now have some room on the agenda for any questions. Just a few minutes if any folks had questions about the process, what House Bill 2001 is, what our phases are, things like that. I see that Kristen has a question.
Thanks. I realized I'm not sure I was clear, and it's important to me just because of quite honestly, I don't want to ever give anybody a sense of conflict of interest and maintain my integrity. I want to be clear. I do work for TBG Architects and Planners. I am not representing the business or my clients. So with that, I'm actually assisting, TBG is assisting Coos Bay. We're assisting LCOG. And LCOG has a contract with Coos Bay to provide some similar services for Coos Bay. It's a different size city, so the regulations are a little different. But I just wanted to disclose that. So I'm not representing Coos Bay. I'm not representing LCOG. So I just want you to know my position doesn't at all have to do with my work other than I bring experience. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Were there any other questions or points? Great, you all are experts now. So the next part that we'll go into and that we'll spend some time on, I have us scheduled for about 45 minutes here. So that is about 5 minutes each, but we're going to go into, and I will share my screen again, our concerns and our hopes. I won't go into presentation mode because I'll close out shortly, but what I wanted to first do was give everybody a couple minutes to write down some thoughts or responses to this question. So we'll just sit and do that for a couple minutes. The question is, what is your biggest concern or worst outcome of allowing more housing in more places in Eugene? I've also put the question in the chat box, and I'll continue to put the questions in the chat box. Okay, I see most eyes, and so I'll start us off. I'll just go through like I was again, just selecting folks. If you need more time to think, just let me know and I'll put you later on in the queue. I will start off with Dan Isaacson.
Oh, thank you. One little factoid that I learned not too long ago is that Eugene has almost exactly the same size as Paris, and in terms of its land size of the city limits. So we can obviously cram a whole lot more people in here if we want to. Now they've had 400 plus years to be able to design that system as opposed to us. But so I guess my concern would be ease and traffic flow, but also mixed with not taking away some of the culture and history from within the city, because I think you're going to have that trade-off of balance. We could knock down every single family home and put up multiplexes, but that's going to take away from the neighborhood. So how do you balance that, those two within it? And also, we still have the ability for the 27-year plan that we just approved and sent to the city council on our growth as well. So how is all going to balance, and what is going to be the impacts on the different industries within Eugene that people rely on for jobs, whether it's the industrial side, whether it's the university side, and going forward from that. So that would be my answers.
Thank you. I was hoping this train would be finished. One moment. I think it is passed. I live by a train. All right, I will pass it over to Dan Lombardi.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll echo a little bit of what Daniel said in terms of concerns in terms of growth and how we grow. I mean, I think there's definitely a tension between growing up and growing out, right? I don't think anybody wants us to become an LA, right, where we're just sprawling out as far as we can within the limits that we have. But there are tensions about how high you build, right? And I think if we want to increase capacity, we have to have those conversations about, what do we do about how high a building can be built? And I know that's going to really cause some struggles with the character of neighborhoods, right? And I speak from experience living in Seattle for a little bit, and watching not only the Ballard neighborhood but also Capitol Hill sort of struggle with how they handle this. And I think seeing single family homes being knocked down and what goes in its place, I think, is where my concern is. What do those structures look like? I think what we were witnessing there were structures that were not built to last, sort of let's throw them up, get them up as quick as we can and get people in them. And so the sort of design didn't really match the character of the neighborhood. And I have a lot of concerns about that, right? I think Eugene is a very beautiful place, and I think people live here because their neighborhoods they love living in them. And so I think we need to try to balance that tension and make sure that we're sort of allowing for construction to happen, more than single family homes, but what do those homes look like, and how do they match up with the rest of the character of the neighborhood?
Thank you. I will pass it over to Kelsey.
Thanks. Yeah, especially thinking through Sustainability Commission and kind of what I can anticipate people will be thinking about from our group. And again, I also don't represent every single individual, but just kind of thinking broadly. I had wrote down like development of critical services don't keep pace. So this idea of if, again, we have, and which I don't necessarily think it would be the case, but if you have a huge influx of housing and for whatever reason, we don't have utilities or the public services, right, that are are keeping pace with the degree to which we're developing housing. So especially if that means like increased congestion or VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Again, I'm kind of reaching. I don't know if I think that is like what would happen, but like in worst case, right? I had also written down like historical preservation, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, and the idea of we do have some designated historical areas and neighborhoods in Eugene that I think would be important to think through how this work would impact those areas specifically. And then I kind of took the question maybe a little bit differently for the last two bullets that I wrote, but I was even thinking about just like the biggest concern or worst outcome for like how we allow more housing in Eugene. And I wrote down that I think a worst case or a big concern for me is this idea of like using property values as a means of dictating like who deserves a home and where they deserve a home. And I think to not say that would be amiss. So I just wanted to throw that in, that anything essentially that however we go about this, if it continues to be exclusionary, I think is still problematic.
Thank you. I'm writing notes for everyone, so I apologize for my delay. I'll toss it over to Kristen.
That's nice. I actually have, well, I'll start this way. I started the Eugene branch of Cascadia, which is the Eugene of the Green Building Council. And there was a speaker who came that made a profound comment. She said, so everybody, and it was well represented, maybe 80 to 100 people showed up. She said, how many people think that Eugene is sustainably minded? Everybody raised their hand. She said, how many people think Eugene is actually acting on those sustainable kind of belief systems? Basically, only maybe 25% kept their hands up. I think we're at a crossroads, quite frankly, in Eugene. I think what I see is tension. We've got a UGB. We're saying in our Envision Eugene adopted plan, our TSP, we're embracing density. It's also our state. And we're saying, yeah, we want, we've got form-based code areas. We're saying, yeah, we want diversity, we want density, yet we also have a really strong voice saying we need to have transitions between different neighborhood zones, and they need to be fairly significant. And we need to have not only transitions, but fences and landscape. So there's some inequities and some of that preservation of the single low density housing neighborhoods. And it's not just, it's a strong voice coming from home ownership, honestly. So I see a tension, or I sense, there is a tension. So I think what the worst outcome would be that we had, so it's like, I'm taking an at-large perspective, which includes what Dan said, both Dans, is that I don't want to lose what we are all proud and why we've chosen to live here, which is kind of, it's walkable neighborhoods, the fact that we have bikeable neighborhoods, we have bike lanes, we have a really great urban forest, we have parks that are fairly accessible by all neighborhoods. Now, is that equitable? No. We're trying with the latest adoption and moving of the park system, we're trying to create more of that equity. We also have great neighborhood services so that we can access services in our neighborhood and walk to them rather than, like you refer, LA, get in our car and drive to them. We've got good public transportation system that's actually growing. So I want all of that to be maintained. What the worst case scenario for me would be that we place too many regulatory barriers on developing housing throughout Eugene, that we're not favoring certain areas. So essentially certain areas are designated the areas that you're going to have denser development. I'd like to see it more equitably distributed in appropriate locations. And appropriate doesn't mean just to be away and protect established single family neighborhoods. I would like just more mixing, which occurs in Paris. It occurs in San Francisco. Granted, these are kind of extreme examples. We're not there yet. Vancouver, BC does a pretty good job as it was transitioning. So I think that design review, you touched on design. Ben uses design review. There's I think it's got an interesting, an application that we could preserve character, yet the flip side, it can be a burden. It can be to some degree more difficult for people to get in housing. So really, I think what my worst case is that we weren't as thoughtful about how to bring all of these items and tensions together. So I think it's going to be a wonderful challenge. And I think making sure that more diverse voices are heard is going to be critical. So that was not as organized as I'd like, but more or less, I think I captured it.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Julia.
Unmute here. Okay. Okay. So let's see. So some of the things I wanted to bring up have already been mentioned, although one point I think it's important when we talk about concern about the quality of what's built, what's not built, is that Eugene a lot of the existing housing stock of Eugene is aging. And so we're not really looking at a question of whether that stock is going to be preserved, but whether it's going to be replaced by unaffordable single family dwellings, or whether it's going to be replaced by something that might be more affordable. I don't actually have structural or infrastructural concerns about the middle housing project, simply because I know that it's going to be happening slowly enough that the city will be able to absorb it. I think one thing to keep in mind is an area where I have concern is for the people who will move into the houses that are created as a result of this project, the housing that is created. And I think it's important that the way that this process is discussed recognizes the need that those people be welcomed as part of Eugene, and that a person who is upset about the historic preservation elements also recognize that the person who needs that housing and moves into that housing just needs a place to live. So hoping that as we go through this process, we really push Eugene to think about its commitment to sustainability, to think about the commitment to equity, and thus to recognize that one of our key concerns is that the person who buys or rents in the duplex or the cottage cluster should be treated as a neighbor on the same level they would be if they were coming in as the owner of a single family dwelling.
Thank you. And lastly, I have Ibrahim.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, but I was on the call all day long. So my main concern, my property is next to duplexes, and I live in Autumn Avenue. For those who know, it's in this going towards Santa Clara, right past the Albertson on your right, and the main concern here that's even bringing tension in the neighborhood is parking. Parking for multiple reasons. People build duplexes and one garage. In that garage, you cannot park a car. It's so tiny. And a duplex have usually at least 2 bedrooms. Here is 3 bedrooms. So you have technically at least two people on one side having cars, and sometimes four cars. So it is becoming problematic in the neighborhood because people don't know where to park. They park, and sometimes in areas where the homeowners get, um, even the neighbors at the duplexes, like my neighbor who usually have his um, um, of everything he can put legally on the curbside so people don't park, he would do it. So I think that's my first concern. The second concern is the cost, because I have around a quarter of an acre. I have a house on the property, and I have a huge backyard. Let's say I want to build a two-bedroom or another structure for someone to move in. Who's gonna finance it? Who's gonna pay for it? If I cannot afford to pay the 10,000, almost 10,000 for the fees and everything else, and then build a new structure. So you're gonna have a lot of single home, single house owners who cannot afford to put a second structure on the property. So how would that look like if we're trying to encourage people to build a second structure so we can reduce the tension on the housing need? So that's my second concern, and I think in the neighborhood you have a lot of people who wouldn't mind have a cottage or have a second structure, but who do not want who do not have or do not want to necessarily uh, 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 um, the means to put a second structure. So we will still have a lot of single home family, single family houses where because of financial reason, there will not be a second structure on the property. How would that contribute to for the city not to meet the housing need? After 2022. So I'm a little concerned about that.
Thank you everyone for sharing. So the next question that I will ask, and I'll go around, I'll try to make it a different order. I will put this on the screen first. Now we are going to talk about our hopes. So the question, and I'll put this in the chat box, is what is your biggest hope or best outcome of allowing more housing in more places? And again, I'll give you a couple minutes to jot down some thoughts or notes, and I'll come back. I see most eyes, but I'll give it about 15 more seconds. And again, if I call on you and you'd like more time, just let me know. All right, I will begin. So we will be going into our biggest hope, best outcomes. And I will start with Kristen.
Okay, so actually, I kind of stated it in my worst. I presented both. So the best outcome and biggest hope would be that we can preserve all the things we love, the walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, the services and neighborhood centers, urban forests and parks. And we've got all of our plans actually support that right now. So the best outcome would be that we have a code, a development code that helps us achieve those results. So in this process, looking at closely the details, how do we make sure that we are actually achieving that diversity, housing throughout the city of Eugene, equity, like Julia said, just basically balancing the needs of all of our community members. But really, that would be the best outcome. Is that, and I actually believe we can do that. And the devil's in the details, quite frankly. So we just have to pay attention to what is really in front of us. And I think Julia said it, is that having a level of honesty, or maybe Kelsey said that, is just being honest with where we are right now and what we're up against, in terms of some of the other tensions in our community. And I get it. I think change is very difficult for a lot of community members. And that's what this is going to mean for them. And Julia brought it up. This change is not going to, it's not going to be immediate. And I think when they first saw House Bill 2001, the South University neighborhood, I had friends call me and they were panicked. Like, oh my God, our house is going to be ripped down. And we're going to have all of this high density multifamily housing put in place of these old established homes. It's like, no. And even if there's a duplex, it's not like all of a sudden, unless your neighbor sells it or rips down their house and puts in a duplex, but change is going to be slow. So I think to some degree, my best hope would be able to communicate and broadcast this throughout our community, so there's a level of understanding. So yeah, okay, there.
Thank you. I'm writing down 2 more words. Great, and I will pass this over to Dan Lombardi.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of my hopes is to just build the vibrancy of this city. It's like, as someone who has lived in Boston, Portland, Seattle, cities that are big and struggle with this, I think there's also something to be said about that vibrant diversity that exists when you're living in a neighborhood that has apartment complexes and duplexes and houses. And we lived in Capitol Hill before we left, and I loved that neighborhood. You can walk around and walk by single family homes, and then you're walking by apartments, and you've got these pocket retail corridors where you can get your coffee, you can get a scone, you can go to the market, and I think Eugene, some parts of Eugene kind of miss that opportunity right now. And when we first moved here, we rented an apartment in Cal Young, and I had a little kid, and I'd take him for a walk in his stroller, and you just walk by homes, right? There's no coffee shop to walk to. There's really nothing, right? And there's also a hesitancy when people see you walking around in neighborhoods like that, if they don't know who you are, especially if you're a renter. So, I think I think if we sort of show people that if we build this diversity of housing within your neighborhood, that it's actually going to make it a better place to live, right? I live in the friendly neighborhood now, and I think there's some of that missing, right? It's really single family homes, and it's great. It's a nice place to walk around, and we can go to the friendly street market. I'd like to see that everywhere, right? I'd like to see Eugene have that in every neighborhood. And so I think that's the hope here, is to sort of be able to build that out and connect to those places, but also maintain the character of those places, right? So, Capitol Hill has its own sort of vibrancy to it and its own feel. And so, Whitaker could be that way, Friendly could be that way, but you still can get from place to place and still be in the city and feel that difference of feeling, but know that you're still all connected, right? That we're all neighbors, we're all Eugenians, we're all trying to do the same thing. And so I think that there's hope in that, and I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done not well, right? And Ballard is an example in Seattle where it's not going well, and people, there's a lot of tension there, right? And so I would like to not see that happen. I think that Eugene's better than that, and so I'm hopeful, and I agree with the sentiment that this is going to be a slow process. So we've got some time to sort of walk people through it and educate and sort of say, this is how this is going to need to happen, right? People are moving here. We can't stop them from moving here. So we have to provide opportunities for places for them to live. It has to be affordable, and it has to be welcoming. And I think we can do that.
Thank you. I will pass it over to Ibrahim.
Yeah, thank you. I think my hope is it's kind of increase the availability of rental units, and in the way that it also decrease the financial tension on the working class people paying rent. And as a rental owner myself, I see how renters struggle with paying rent. It's some of them is more than 50% of their income they have to come up with to pay the rent. And I've also hear conversation from some landlords saying that I'm just following the market price. This is whatever is available to me, that's what I'm taking. And my hope is having more units available for rental will probably drive the price down a little bit. I think it's unbearable and sustainable for a lot of people. That would be my biggest hope.
Thank you. And I will pass it over to Julia.
Okay, lots of echoing again here. I guess I would bring up 3 points of things that would be most important. First of all, I have to agree with Ibrahim. I think that, Eugene vacancy rates right now are something like 1% to 2%, and it doesn't matter whether you're looking as a renter or as a potential home buyer. We all know, and there's, I'm sure, 5 people on this call who are better able than I am to cite the statistic, but when there's a mismatch between supply and demand in housing, the impact on rent and house prices is highly disproportionate, meaning it doesn't have to take tens of thousands of new units to really appreciably influence what's happening with rents, what's happening with house prices in Eugene. So that has to be the biggest hope. And then my second hope, echoing what Dan said, it really is that, density creates destinations. If you have a super spaced out neighborhood, as he was describing, you don't have as many places to walk to. So when you think about walkability, I don't think the risk for Eugene is that the middle housing, the amount of density that is implicit in the middle housing project, that's not going to make Eugene less walkable. It's going to make Eugene more walkable, because at the end of that walk, there's going to be a business that's able to survive because more people can walk to it. One of the really great things about people who move into townhouses and cottage clusters is they have really little kitchens. They go out and they buy something at the local food truck, and that creates a different kind of environment than one where everyone is at home cooking in their own kitchen, but it's also a really thriving and wonderful opportunity. So that would be the two things I would say. And I guess just on the sort of my other social/cultural hope is that the Eugene area historically, if we go back to, the 60s and 70s, has been a place of housing innovation. And there seems to be a way that Eugene could tap into its history of innovation and experimentation and recognize that this is a very Eugene thing to do. So I guess that one of my greatest hopes is that people would not see this as something imposed on Eugene, driven by Portland-related urban concerns, but instead that this is something that Eugene can take and run with it. So to that extent, my hope would be that the regulations are as inclusive as possible, that the largest percentage of people who own a lot or a house in Eugene are empowered to do something with it if and when that lot and that person have money at the same time, and also that potentially the city could try to facilitate that process. For example, I think one of the things that's come up in some of the Housing Policy Board discussions was the theoretical possibility of model plans for ADUs, so that if there are small barriers, or I know that's not a very small barrier, but if there are barriers that the city has it within its power to remove, allowing people to say, here are 6 pre-approved plans, that could reduce some of the tension in creating houses, and also reduce the likelihood that when someone decides they want to put up a duplex, that duplex is going to have to go through a complex, neighborhood comment period. I don't know enough about the planning code to know how this works, but I'm under the impression that there are ways that pre-approval of certain designs can potentially make it easier for people who want to build to do so. So I guess that would be a hope that that kind of possibility be explored.
Thank you. I'll pass it to Kelsey.
Thanks. I dreamed really big here, so I'm I'm gonna read through some of my notes. I had put down eliminating homelessness. I think there are a lot of people, especially with coronavirus, that are on the cusp of extreme financial insecurity, that we are about to potentially see a lot more people who become homeless because of our current financial crisis and economic situation. And I think if we again start creating housing stock that is more affordable for people, and like looking at a spectrum of what is affordability, that to me feels possible and within reach. Additionally, just reduce racial inequity in Eugene. Eugene and Oregon has such an extreme history of that, and the way that our housing development has occurred has certainly spoken to that comment, or spoken to that kind of idea. And I think there's a lot that changing the way that we develop housing can be kind of leveraged to reduce that. I think also, in addition, just the ability for more people to be able to be in a community where, again, having stable housing, I think, is akin to having access to mental and physical stability. And just looking at millennials, I think I'm not on a path to be able to afford a single family home anytime in the near future. And it's not because I don't work. It's not because I'm not educated. I think just the way the economy that I grew up in has been not conducive to that. And so in that way, like my timeline is not that of my parents, in the way that my future is going to be playing out. And I think housing is a key component to that. So I think, and some people have been speaking to this, and I really appreciate, but this idea of just setting a template for the future of communities post 2021. And Julia, I think you spoke really well to that they're like looking at like, what does it mean to be innovative, and what does it mean for us to embrace innovation? I think in a lot of ways, the 1950s and the housing housing patterns that developed post-World War II are a template, right? Like a template and a form that was set in that period based on the nature of what was happening. And in the way that that was set and formed in that period, it can also be remade. And I think in Eugene, I would love to see us just think about and look through, like, what does that mean for us here? And what does that mean to look like, to be a template for other places? And there was a comment about, that this is going to be like a slow kind of process. And I agree with that. However, I would also kind of challenge us to also consider that, or like, I sometimes take issue with the idea that the only type of change we accept has to be slow. I think we, to some extent, as it pertains to climate change, have really kicked the can down the road in a way that making slow change will be a luxury. And I think even just looking at our wildfire situation and the number of people that were immediately without homes within the matter of a week is unfortunately not going to be an anomaly in the future we're moving into, just even as it pertains to climate. So I think, again, thinking through that, like, it's not even about millennials, right? Or it's not even about some people not being able to afford a home in this moment, but like in the future, because of climate impacts, because of environmental refugees, these are issues that we need to have a stock that is ready to adopt and welcome in those people. And I think having that, so that is my biggest hope in some ways, that we would become a template city for what it looks like to be responding to those pressures that I think are definitely upon us, whether we like them or not.
Thank you. And lastly, I have Daniel Isaacson.
My thought is somebody who lived in Eugene and watched Prefontaine run, coming back to Eugene and walking down its street, still being able to recognize the street that they knew or the city that they knew, but also being impressed and proud of the stewardship that the city and people like us who have had our positions before us and will have our positions after us have had that public trust to build the city into what it is now. So that would be first. The second thing I would say is, we have parking spaces downtown that make more money per hour than the staff who work in the restaurants outside. And for me, it's about how do we find ways that as we're adding these housing opportunities, that people at every economic ladder rung have the ability to participate in and find housing that meets their needs, and not just four walls and a roof. So having housing that's $1,800 a month, if you're making $10, or well, maybe $12 an hour now, an hour doesn't move the needle. So how do we have that to the conversation that allows for growth, allows for folks who have needs in all different sectors and demographics, and also continues to be the part of Eugene that made us all want to move here.
Thank you. We did great on time. Now I have a scheduled 5-minute break. I have the time as 6:40. So at 6:45, we will all reconvene and re-begin. But thank you everybody for sharing, for being so thoughtful with your answers and your perspectives. And I will see you soon. I'll give folks a couple minutes just as we filter back. Thank you for spending your evening with us. All right, I think I will get started. So for this next part, we are going to focus on developing the guiding values and principles, and I will kick it over to Terry. I'll share my screen again.
Thanks, Sophie. So as I was mentioning before, guiding values and principles are something that we used when we were developing the Envision Eugene Community Vision in 2011. And it was a process of gathering a full range of community perspectives from a lot of different groups. The idea is to develop concepts or ideas, short statements for values and principles that can be combined then with what we hear from other groups. Before we ask you to go through this, I'm going to click through 2 more slides where we explain what those other groups are and who else we will be asking these same questions. After we've asked that over the fall, we will ask things like what's missing from the 7 pillars, what is needed for housing that might be different from that set of guiding values and principles. And again, just a reminder that we're at the beginning. This is not a closed process, and you're welcome to submit follow-up ideas to staff. We'll be collecting those over the next couple of months. So if you would go to the next, thank you. You anticipated my need. This is from one of our fact sheets on the website, and it's titled Middle Housing Implementation Project Timeline. We are in the fall of 2020 in the second phase, or starting to go into the second phase. Really, I would say we're still in phase 1. The public involvement plan was developed over the summer. It was taken to the Planning Commission and City Council, and then ultimately approved by the Planning Commission in August. And we're now starting to implement that public involvement plan into the fall. Kind of on a parallel track, we have a set of consultants that are helping us develop design and code concepts that will be shared in the winter. And in the spring, those concepts will be turned into actual code and policies for consideration by our decision makers through a formal adoption process starting later in 2021. Our deadline, as a reminder, is to adopt by June 30th, 2022. And an adoption process can take up to a year depending on what direction we get and how many revision cycles occur through the public process. Okay, so as promised, this is a look at the project structure. The groups across the top, we have key stakeholder groups, community members, the Eugene Planning Commission, and the Eugene City Council. This group is under key stakeholder groups as the Boards and Commissions Roundtable. And I will point out that all of you except the Historic Review Board directly advise the City Council on certain matters. And so that is a role that you have both within this meeting and separately as you work with your boards to develop recommendations. So as a quick example, when we were developing the Envision Eugene Urban Growth Boundary Proposal, it followed a similar process as Middle Housing Code amendments will, where there's a formal recommending role of the Eugene Planning Commission, but other boards and commissions weighed in and submitted letters to the City Council, including the Sustainability Commission. and at various points in the process, other boards and commissions as well. Let's see what else to say about this. The Eugene City Council is the ultimate decision maker at the local level. However, our code amendments and policies need to be acknowledged at the state level as in compliance with state rules and laws. So the blue circles, we have the staff team that's liaising with all of the different groups and our consultants in the blue bubble below staff. The Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, as I mentioned, is the adoption body, and agency experts from other coordinating bodies are over in the right-hand circle. So you can find this in our fact sheet on our website, and I think we'll go back to the core values and principles slide and do that exercise. But I am very open to feedback about the order of this presentation. We're doing this again tomorrow night, and I'm realizing as I'm talking that it probably would have been better to explain those graphics at the beginning. So if y'all wouldn't mind giving me some feedback on that when we're all done, that would be most welcome. Okay, so I think Sophie's gonna guide us through this question like we did before.
Yes, so you all saw that we are trying to hear from as many people as possible. You are one of those groups, and this phase of the project, we are asking them all the same thing about their hopes and their fears, and then from the hopes and fears, developing a set of guiding values and principles that we will then use to guide the technical process in the spring when we're looking, or winter spring, and we're looking at our design codes and concepts that are in compliance with the minimum standards established by the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we didn't want to put too much pressure on you all to come up with those concrete things tonight. We do have over 35 minutes to come up with those, but we thought that it would be helpful to have you reflect on what was expressed tonight with the concerns and the hopes, and just start brainstorming those guiding values and principles. And if we don't come up with those concrete ones, staff will work to develop those guiding values and principles, almost like we did with Envision Eugene. And I see Ibrahim's hand up.
Yeah, my question is, how many times this group is going to meet?
That is a great question. So we have you scheduled to meet 2 to 3 times. This will be the only time we'll be meeting during this phase of the project. So the next meeting will be sometime in early 2021. And that's when we'll be asking for your feedback on the code concepts that we come up with.
Okay.
Let's see, Julia.
I'm just thinking that given comments from different people, some clustered around the idea of where things go wrong, which often is one neighborhood, Ballard was an example, where there's a disproportionate impact. And also keeping in mind the idea that the more the new middle housing is spread throughout neighborhoods, the less impact on parking, et cetera, it would seem that a principle could be that we would encourage a code that facilitates the broadest possible dispersal of potential siting for not the duplexes, which I know can be anywhere, but I think one of the issues we would have to address in a code concept would be whether we are encouraging that to be broadly dispersed versus concentrated. Is that one of the things that we would address as a concept?
Kind of.
Yeah, okay.
It's too soon to say because we've seen the minimum standards written up until this point, and we know that we will likely see some revisions to the last copy that we saw when the packet comes out tomorrow. We will have some control over things like lot size. And so when we look at, average lot sizes around Eugene, and Terry, if I go down the wrong road, let me know. We can look at average lot size around Eugene and see, where would, if we allowed middle housing on a certain size lots, would that disproportionately impact any neighborhoods?
Right. But could a principle be effort to minimize disproportionate impact on specific neighborhoods, for example?
Yes, I think that could be.
So
could you just talk about it a little bit more? Did you say avoid disproportionate impact?
yeah, the idea is could a principle be to avoid disproportionate impact on specific neighborhoods by facilitating terms that would allow dispersal throughout more neighborhoods? And it would seem that the more different places people could implement this, the better in terms of avoiding infrastructure crises, or one neighborhood where suddenly there's no parking, or
Yeah, thanks.
If I may, I think all of this is gonna be like available for homeowners to, if they're gonna want to go that route. Let's say have a single family house, you would be the city would make it appealing, or at least not very challenging, to build a second structure. Am I right? This is not like making it mandatory for people to build those things.
Correct.
And which tells me that we will probably still have the same I don't want to say layout, but it's areas where we do not have actually multiple family houses and or low income houses or whatever, are less likely to see a boom, a rise on South Eugene. Is not where you're gonna find people building a second house on their property. And I think it's more likely to be toward West Eugene, North Eugene, Santa Clara, and those kind of things. And I think what the city should consider is to look at this project, and somebody talked about it here about transportation and services and everything else. I think and also climate change, environment, everything, because transportation is a big part of carbon footprint. And I see that to alleviate those parking problems, we're gonna have to develop public transportation. I used to live in downtown Eugene and work in Junction City at the state hospital. And for almost a year and a half, I was using the bus to go to work because I was 3 blocks from the bus station, and it was easier for me to catch the bus and just go to work, don't have to drive. But where I live right now, for someone to catch a bus, I think the person will have to walk like a mile. If you walk like a mile and it's cold or raining, it's not appealing. While we're encouraging those type of things, I think it's probably the right time for the city to start thinking about the bus, public transportation system. It goes together. And parks. Someone talked about parks, and stores, those kind of convenience stores, and where people can build all those kind of things. And I think it all go together. And as we are thinking about how we move forward from here, I think we're gonna have some pushback on the neighborhood where I'm part of the CDBG, where they encourage the low income housing and fund some developers up. I mean, some how they call them, those like St. Vincent de Paul, those people, those structures that offer low income housing, kind of identify areas where they can build a low income housing and finance them. I think Julia is part of CDBG too, but maybe wrong. So the main pushback is in certain neighborhood. People don't want those things there, and this, the positive side about this one is the homeowner would make the decision on their own to have a second structure on the property or not. It's not up to the neighborhood. It's up to the person, and it's critical to think about how to put together measures, at least incentive that would encourage people to do that. If it's, I thought about it. I thought about in this property at least having a second structure on the backyard. The process, the cost, and everything else is not appealing. It's not appealing, and I think the city has an opportunity, if they want to go that route, to at least kind of mitigate those costs. And so, well, we like the new tax on new properties, I think, where the developers have I think 10 years to pay, and those kind of incentive can bring people to build more units as the need for units are so urgent right now, and to avoid middle class homelessness and working class homelessness. A lot of people work actually, but they cannot afford to come up with first month rent, deposit, last month rent, and all those kind of things that it takes you almost $5,000 to move into a 2-bedroom house. A lot of people cannot come up with that money because we have bills and we get. So it is important that the city sees that and try to think about ways to encourage. This is going to take a lot of incentive for people to start even building a second unit on the property, or the property's price is going to go up because developers who have money to build complexes will now prey on single family houses to be able to build apartment complex or whatever, and that's gonna only drive the prices up because people will sell the single family house at a higher price since it's for commercial purpose. So we have to also look at that, and hopefully more people will come up with more ideas for us to move to offer something to this committee, this board.
Thank you. If it's okay, Sophie, I wanted to interject a comment because I think it's a useful piece of information that relates to the question that Julia just had and some of the comments that Ibrahim just had. So early on in the rulemaking for House Bill 2001, and again, they're not complete, but what we understand right now from the rulemaking process is that there were originally a couple of different ways about thinking about where cities would be required to allow new types of middle housing. One approach or kind of philosophy was called the balloon approach. And it was like, put middle housing near amenities like transit and parks and schools and commercial services and places that are already walkable. That's where you should put most of the new middle housing. The other approach or philosophy was the whittle away approach, which is it should be allowed everywhere to increase the greatest amount of accessibility and only take places off the table if you have a really good reason, like you can't provide infrastructure or something like that. That is the way the current rules are written. And so that is our current understanding of the approach to citing middle housing and why we wouldn't, for instance, be necessarily allowed to say that we want them in certain places or that we get to pick as a city which parts of which neighborhoods will receive the infill. So I'll pause and ask for questions about that point of clarification. Yeah.
Could I just respond to that? My point that I was making was specifically that we would look for we would express as a principle something that was close to that whittle away, in the sense that a principle should be that it is broader and more open. So if that's already built into the code, then that wouldn't be a principle. But obviously we could just say that.
I think it's insightful that you said that, not knowing about whittle away and balloon, but I felt like I had to clarify that because I think it's very likely that the rules we'll see tomorrow still have that approach in there, and the rest of the groups will have access, will have the benefit of having those rules out. And once we have a chance to look at them, we can share kind of the key takeaways from them.
So that was my point. Whittle away is good.
And I'll also clarify, this is my first rodeo. So still learning how to facilitate these conversations, but really where we will be depending on these values and principles that we're going to be establishing will be when we are faced with the code concepts. And the code concepts will be asking, do we do the minimum required to meet the code, the requirements of the code, or do we do more than the minimum, and what would that justification be? And so that's really what we are asking tonight. It's for those guiding principles to lead us in the right direction.
Sorry, Sophie, can you repeat that one more time, especially the last part? I need to wrap my brain around it again.
Yes, thank you. So DLCD is establishing these minimum standards for compliance with House Bill 2001. And when we are developing in the winter and spring, these code concepts for compliance with the bill, different ways to comply, we will be looking to these guiding values and principles to see if we do the minimum or if we go beyond the minimum. And we're hoping that these provide guidance and justification for the path that we go down that meets the interests of the community. Did that make sense? Or did I word it correctly? Okay. I see Julia's hand.
I'm sorry. So if you stated in those terms, I would say maximize the opportunities of implementation in the interest of equity and sustainability. That would be the way I would phrase it.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question too, Sophie?
Yes.
I don't know why I don't seem to find my raising hand. So sorry. So I just asking things in the chat. I don't know why I don't have the option. So anyways, I have just a quick question in terms of, this is coming from my kind of at-large planning commissioner hat, is what I'm cognizant of, and I just want to ask you, how does this work in the realm of, okay, we've got guiding values and principles through this process, and where I'm finding it quite frankly, a little challenging is because there's values and principles that are attached to Envision Eugene. They're attached to a bunch of adopted plans and policies. So we're not in a box. We're not in a giant universal or universe here describing guiding values and principles. So just kind of give me some context of how do you distill it? And right now we just kind of drop a bunch of aspirational goals, or what is going to best serve you? And I'm sorry to put this kind of wonky overlay on this, but I just need a little better understanding.
I see Terry's brain cranking.
I was going to say, the last thing you said, Kristen, do we just kind of brainstorm? I think what we're asking you to do, and what we'll ask all the groups to do, is from where you enter this meeting, thinking about your role and who you represent, what do those communities' values inspire you to say about our implementation of this project? So that's why we went through concerns and hopes. We were trying to flesh out what are some of the pros and cons or concerns and hopes about adding more housing. We know we're adding more housing to more places in Eugene. That's the whole goal, the whole point of the bill. But as we do that, what are things we should be looking out for? What are impacts we should be mitigating or adjusting? And as Ibrahim was talking, I started thinking about externalities. And after we implement the bill, do we have more work to do in making sure we have transportation and parks and services available to, I mean, it's just that it just keeps building because the bill is quite narrow, but it impacts everything. All other areas of planning, I should say. So it's yes, and I think we're pretty open. And as Sophie mentioned, this is our first meeting. So we're trying something a little bit new, but that is how we generally did it for Envision Eugene, was what are trying to get a handle on community needs as expressed by your all's perspectives around concerns and hopes, and then turning those into value or principle statements that relate to housing. So it's kind of refining down from the Envision Eugene lens to one that is more directly in response to housing. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. That's great.
I think I saw Kelsey.
I think Ibrahim was first, and then I'll.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong direction. Ibrahim.
Please, Kelsey, go first.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to jump in and say, in terms of, and this is still like super broad, so I don't know if it's helpful, but yeah, I kind of want to uplift two parts of, I think two things that Julia had said especially, but Julia had made a comment a while ago about like the idea of like communication as part of this, and how there was this kind of like disconnect between like whoever was sharing the anecdote, that kind of like this, the news came out about House Bill 2001, and your neighbor, whoever said their neighbors were like, oh my God, are they going to come and tear my home down, right? So I think there's like a communication piece to all of this that's critical, that should be part of how we move forward with this work, I think, and what that looks like in terms of how it's messaged as this goes forward. And I think too, in terms of like a principle, or however we want to call it, I really love the term innovation, which is also something that Julia had used, because I do think it taps into this like very historical Eugene element, especially when we think about like the Whitaker and just some of the movements that Eugene kind of grew up on in the 60s and 70s. And I really like the idea of factoring in this idea of innovation, which I understand might scare some people, how we use that and the terminology around that. But I think it's important to kind of couch it in those terms, because I think that is what we're trying to do. And I think, again, like Eugene has historically had that spirit, and bringing that to the forefront, I think, could be a useful idea.
Yeah, I really wish I knew what exactly we were going to talk about tonight, because more I think about it, and I'm really concerned that we need a lot of communication, but we also need we also want the city to pace that a little bit. So we don't get what cities like San Francisco or New York City had experienced, meaning that developers with a lot of money will come trying to push out any kind of uh, single house, single family house owner out of the property to buy it. They will prey on properties they'll buy it. We've seen buildings raising in downtown Eugene, seeing, but that doesn't necessarily drive the cost down. If you look at the rent in those new buildings in downtown Eugene, it's expensive. It is a lot of money for a studio, $1,100-$1,200, and and we know that the pressure on the housing need will only go up, as we've seen since the wildfire, the climate change, you know, people moving from California down here, and for anybody here who tried to buy a house within the last 3 years, you have probably experienced people coming with cash in hand and making offer and say, I'll buy it right now, no need for this, whatever, I don't need, all those, procedural things that the other person will go with. So we already seeing that. And I think we need to pay close, the city need to pay close attention, or at least consider that not necessarily jumping all the way to allow developers who are usually the people who try to make money at any cost on low income or middle class people, take this opportunity to drive the price of the rental up. Because for those single family house owners who cannot afford to build a second structure on their property, there will not be any extra unit available. For those who can, it's probably a way for them to move away from building low income housing and building middle class units, and then drive the price up. And which is because they know this is a market that people have at least some sort of income, and they don't want to be homeless, and they sometimes working 2-3 jobs to try to pay the rent. So that how we address that, I don't know. I think we have 2-3 more meetings to think about that, and it would be great for the city to consider that too, because we looking at what we have downtown, at least the student housing, that we have, most of which are have a lot of vacancies, but they're still building, knowing, and the price is not going down. Prices now of the rental is not going down. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Thank you. I started a sticky note of what I think I've heard so far. So I wanted to do a bit of a temperature check and see if this is what you all have said and I'm hearing things correctly. Kind of just these general overarching themes. I have sustainability, equity, embracing and sustaining Eugene's identity, economic recovery and vitality. I also pulled these from hopes and concerns, not just this part of the conversation. historic preservation. And then I wrote down communicating the vision, but crossed it out and wrote welcoming neighborhoods. Communicating the technical aspects, quality building materials, housing opportunity for all income levels, and balancing needs with infrastructure. If we are all a thermometer, and cool is that sounds good, and hot is no, Sophie. Can I visually see where people are at? Okay, cool. And I see Dan Lombardi's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point that sort of came to mind. Terry, thanks for sharing that analogy of the balloon versus the whittling away. I mean, I think I totally agree. The whittling is important. And I almost feel like, is there a way to have some sort of value or principle that says, okay, we whittle, right? We look at all these different parts of the city, but then we start to see where can we have these balloons throughout the city, right? So I think about it from the economic perspective of, you know, if we're sort of thinking about where are the existing economic or sort of retail corridors, right, within the different communities, you know, building around those to sort of solidify those areas, make sure that they're economically viable, people can walk to them, they can continue to use those businesses, more likely for there to be transportation options through there. So you kind of maybe mitigate the parking issues where you say, hey, this is a neighborhood that's walkable. You could work in this neighborhood. You can take the bus from this neighborhood. Bike lanes are here to go from here to there. But there's also this tension of you've got places like in the northern part of the city, like Cal Young, that don't have those economic opportunities. So, you know, how are we sort of thinking about mixed use, right? Are we building things that have retail on the bottom floor? And then people live above that. You know, how are we sort of accounting for that so that you can start to build those pockets within those communities quickly? So you're putting housing in, but you're also providing that economic opportunity for people to do their shopping close to where they live. So.
Thank you. And I have Kristen in the queue and then Dan Isaacson.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, once again, it's so weird that you can't see it makes it weird for me in terms of participation too. So I wanted to note that in terms of values and principles, wearing my hat as kind of at large as a planning commissioner, once again, not representing the planning commission, I think Vision Eugene does a really excellent job actually taking a look at its two sections that are specific to housing. So provide housing affordable to all income levels. Those segments within there are quite comprehensive and really summarize what we've been talking about tonight, actually. And then you have this other element of Envision Eugene, protect, repair, and enhance neighborhood livability. So I think once again, that outlines a lot of the values and principles expressed by the city of Eugene through that process. And that also was a very comprehensive, very involved public process. So a couple of the pieces that I think are also guiding values and principles are exactly what I think Kelsey talked about, and that's communication. So it's public participation in education. So public, it's a state mandated planning regulation. Planning Commission is actually responsible or holds one of those responsibilities in terms of public participation and involvement. So I think that involvement in education being comprehensive in how we talk about it, because ultimately what we've talked about tonight and what I in Envision Eugene, I love it. It's to some degree, it is aspirational. It's dreaming. So really now it's that analogy I gave at the very beginning. So now we need to create tools. It's going to be difficult. We are not only balancing diverse interests in terms of what housing and livability looks like, but we're also looking at the comprehensive impacts, what Terry brought up, in terms of other externalities, the other parts of our city that are going to be impacted by the choices we make. So innovation, Kelsey brought it up. I think it's actually critical. We have got to look at this differently. Maybe Julia brought it up or maybe Kelsey did, in terms of kind of the 1950s model. Cal Young, you bring up Cal Young. It's actually not a neighborhood that is totally open arms in terms of what you're talking about. So it's not necessarily that the opportunities aren't there. It's just they're not as fully embraced. You've got a more difficult transition. You've got suburbia. You've got more of a 1950s kind of model. So really what we're talking about is innovation, incentives, balance, having a real conversation in our community to say, hey, you went through this Envision Eugene process. Now we're here in terms of housing. How are we going to get it done? So it's going to be an interesting and very challenging and difficult discussion is really what I sense. So my value and principle, I think another piece to this is just a constant reminder of where we're coming from, what we've already decided, and now we're at the next step. And how do we support that? And providing constant context. That context is critical. Each of these clear and objective standards, each of these pieces, a lot of these other efforts that are happening simultaneously, River Road, Santa Clara, they're all connected. And we need to maintain that continuity of Envision Eugene, which is our larger values and principles. So that didn't really totally answer your question, but I think it's probably, it's our challenge. So I'm not quite sure how to elaborate personally on guiding values and principles. I think we've got guiding values and principles to a large degree. So we're at the next level. So what are those values and principles to get us tools, incentives, strategies? Okay, that's it.
Thank you. And I'll have Dan Isaacson be our last speaker, and then we'll wrap up. But as Terry said, this is an open, ongoing conversation. And if you have any additional thoughts or your boards and commissions have additional thoughts, please send them our way.
Yeah, the only thing I thought that was missing from our kind of synopsis is that time is of the essence, right? I mean, we can have all the philosophical discussions in the world, but in the end, our goal must be to act. And there are people being added to our community every single day. And there are going to be people who are going to be dropping out of our housed community every single day. And so at some point we have to be open to hearing our community and hearing the ideas and different people who contribute to it. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a deadline that says we're going to start swinging some hammers here pretty soon and start building some of these things. And that has to be part of the urgency. There has to be a sense of urgency behind it that I think is important.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all of your sharing and thoughts. So I will share my screen briefly just to outline what the next steps are. So there are several other efforts that we're doing for outreach. I won't tell you all about them now because we're really close to 7:30. We are hosting a Healthy Democracy panel, which will consist of 30 random Eugene community members chosen via an algorithm lottery system. If you'd like to read more about that, we have a little blurb on the website, or you can reach out to us. We're also holding an equity roundtable. We're working with a group of University of Oregon undergraduates to conduct some student outreach. We are getting the packet for the Land Conservation and Development Commission meeting on November 12th and 13th, which is where they will review the latest version of the model code and minimum standards for House Bill 2001 and could possibly adopt them in these days. We'll be going to Planning Commission on December 14th to present what we've heard from this first phase of public outreach. We will have the draft code concepts ready in early 2021. And then around that time, I will reach out to schedule another meeting or two with you all to review those. I also wanted to briefly touch on, if you go to our webpage, which I have linked on the slide I'm about to show you, we have the fact sheets that I sent you all. And then if you click this link that says visit the DLCD site, it'll take you straight to the rulemaking page. If you wanted to get really deep into code, you can look at meeting packets from the advisory committee meetings. But other than that, the last thing I will say is that here's our contact information. I will email you out a copy of this presentation along with the link to sign up for the interested parties list. We have our webpage. We also have an interactive page on our Engage Eugene platform. And we have some opportunities to share your housing stories, to stay updated with meeting links. So if you're interested in reading more, you are totally welcome to. And if you're interested in saying more, we'd love to hear it via email, or we're not very good with phones these days since we're working from home, but we can give you our phone numbers if you need those too. Terry, did you have anything else to add?
Sophie, and thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules to participate in this. We know that you're volunteers, and we greatly appreciate the time that you spend serving on the boards and commissions that you do. The last thing I will say is I'm totally serious and genuine about my desire for feedback on this meeting, and we have our next one tomorrow. So please, if you have any thoughts, or you could have done this differently, or I need this other piece of information, that's really, really good information for us to have. And that is it.
Thank you, Sophie and
Next question.
Terry. Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
great to meet you all, those that I haven't met.
Thank you for hosting. Good to be part of this.
Thank you, everyone, very much.
Thank you, Julia.
Have a good evening.
Very valuable. Good evening.